I would like to welcome you to the 38th Annual Carter Town Hall. Please help me welcome the 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, please be seated. Good. Good evening. My name is Ben Palmer, and if you don't know me, I'm serving this year as your student body president. And every year it's the privilege of the holder of my position to kick off the Carter Town Hall. Emory is blessed and privileged to have such a rich relationship and dedicated time with President Carter. And I've been particularly lucky. This is actually my third year coming to a Carter Town Hall, and each time I've found it an incredibly refreshing opportunity, not only to pick the brain of such an exceptional individual, but also be present with ourselves and the purpose of Emory as an institution. And why is that important? Well, we live in a moment where government and public institutions are functioning at a credibility deficit. Many people, and fairly so, feel forgotten and often taken advantage of. And compounding on this crisis, of course, we have leadership who takes advantage of our differences, weaponizes truth as a relative notion, and assaults our principles and morals as a society on a daily basis. And that's overwhelming. It's scary. And most of all, it's so easy to get caught up in that kind of noise and feel hopeless. But by embracing the values and legacy of President Carter, we can remain engaged, present, and intentional amongst all of it. And that is what tonight is. That's the purpose. It's a moment where we are reminded of who we are and inspired to accept the challenge that is our calling as an Emory family, to dedicate ourselves to the application of our knowledge for the service of humanity. And there's no better way to celebrate our mission than by engaging with an exceptional member of our own family. President Carter's life and legacy exemplify the importance of ethics, truth, and civil service. So, President Carter, on behalf of the student body, thank you for being here, and thank you for everything that you've done in the service of humanity. Truly. Absolutely. Emory, and I want to thank all of you for engaging in this wonderful tradition. I'm so excited for this conversation. But first, it's now my great honor to welcome to the podium another beloved president here at Emory. Whether it's pioneering work on health disparities or her investment in community engagement, she has dedicated her life and career to the service of others. Her accolades are far too many to list up here, but suffice it to say her dedication to the welfare of humanity and the mission of our university is Emory Excellent personified. So please join me in welcoming to the podium President Claire E. Stirk.
So one more good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for joining us. Actually, I think we should all be thanking President and Mrs. Carter, because I've never felt so much energy in this room as I'm feeling tonight. So thank you very much, and thank you too, Mrs. Carter. Now, this is a somewhat challenging task to have, because while it is my distinct honor to welcome a man who needs no introduction, a man who has changed history, a champion of human rights, winner of the Nobel Peace Prize for 2002, the author of more than 30 books, a leader whose work has brought meaningful change and hope to millions around the world. It all started here, right in Georgia. When elected governor of Georgia in 1971, President Carter, then Governor Carter, gave an inaugural speech that called for justice. We're still calling for justice. He gave that speech on a platform surrounded by political leaders who had supported racial discrimination and other forms of injustice, the kind of courage it takes to do something like that. His bold speech left no doubt that this was a new day for Georgia politics. Actually, it was a new day for Georgia. In 1977, James Earl Carter was elected the President of the United States of America. Yes, we should applaud for that. In the many decades since, that same courage has led President Carter to champion humanitarian work around the world. Through the Carter Center, President Carter and his wife and partner, Rosalind, have protected human rights, promoted democracy, and confronted some of the most challenging situations in the world, including intractable diseases that disproportionately affect the poorest among the poor. You don't find this very often, but President Carter continues to lead by example. He and his wife, Rosalind, volunteer for Habitat for Humanity. If you don't know that, you have not been paying attention. He also teaches Sunday school and is a deacon in the Maranatha Baptist Church of Plains, Georgia. Now, here at Emory, we have been fortunate to have President Carter as University Distinguished Professor since 1982. And we have been very fortunate because of the long-standing, close and deep and meaningful partnership with the Carter Center. Tonight, as many of you know, it was not a test, but you should know this, is our 38th annual Carter Town Hall. Something truly to be celebrated, right? So let's applaud one more time. Thank you, President Carter, and thank you, Mrs. Carter, for showing the world the power of compassion in action and for reminding us daily that peaceful democracy is possible and something we all should commit to. Now, I would like to pause for a moment to celebrate a very important milestone. In the next 2 weeks, actually it's a little less, it's 14 days if you count dates, it's a day less than 2 weeks, President Carter will be celebrating his 95th birthday. I know it's not time for questions yet, but did you think you were going to turn 95? You can answer later. Now, I know that all of you will join me in wishing him a happy birthday. So let's sing together. I'm not a good singer, so I need all of you to help me out here. Here we go.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, President Carter. Happy birthday to you.
We found a card for President Carter. Would you open it up a little bit? So this is how we start the celebration. There will be 14 more days of celebrating. And thank you, everybody, for singing along for this very, very, very special moment. Now, please join me in welcoming and listen to this. Our tenured Emory University Distinguished Professor. Who also is the 39th President of the United States of America, Jimmy Carter.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I want to thank Claire for the announcement about my tenure. I've been here almost 39 years. And when I first arrived, I asked Jim Laney, how do you get tenure? He said, well, not only do you have to have a very good reputation as a teacher, but you have to write books also. So I wrote one book, and then I wrote 2 books, and I wrote 10 books, and I wrote 20 books, and I wrote 30 books. And finally, I wrote 33 books, and Claire finally gave me tenure. So I thank you for it. Well, Ben and Claire have done a good job introducing me, and my birthday and all like that. Thank you for the fairly harmonious birthday gift. I think you all know that the Carter Center is part of Emory University. And then whenever I go to North Korea or to Vietnam, or when I go to China or to Nigeria or to Ethiopia, I represent you. And I represent all the professors and students at Emory University and at Oxford as well. So thank you very much for letting me do that, and I'm very grateful to you. Also, I want to say that when you are no longer a sophomore, you can apply to become an intern at the Carter Center. And your new Vice President of Student Affairs, stand up a minute, okay? Is one of our former interns, and congratulations to you for your new position. And so, when you graduate from being a sophomore, you can put in for an internship at the Carter Center, and we'll send you to Cambodia to hold elections. We'll send you to Latin America to hold elections. We'll send you to South America, Central America, the Caribbean, Africa, Asia, to hold elections if you become an intern. I can't promise that, but some of our interns have been to all those places. So thank you very much. And don't ever forget that no matter what we do at the Carter Center, and I brag on the Carter Center quite often, we represent you as well. So you're part of the Carter Center, and I'm part of Emory. Thank you very much. And now, with some trepidation, I will agree to answer questions from the student body. So thank you very much.
Hello, President Carter. This is on. It's not on. It's on. Hi, President Carter. My name is Xavier Saeed. I'm a senior in the college, and I study music and Jewish studies. It is an honor today to be able to ask you questions submitted by our audience. And the first one we have is from Donovan to Julia, submitted on Twitter. Donovan to Julia, could you please stand up? Thank you. She has asked, what book did you read that changed your life?
Well, I read the Bible pretty regularly. In fact, my wife and I read the Bible every night, and that keeps our marriage together for 73 years, right? And I'm a fan of Patrick O'Brian. How many of you have read a Patrick O'Brian novel? It's about the British Navy. And I broke my hip a few months ago, and I've been kind of dormant since then, so I've read 21 of Patrick O'Brian's books, which is all he's written. He's a wonderful writer, and he is one of my favorites. But I read voluminously. I have a pretty good library at home, and so I'm a very avid reader of all kinds. So I would say the Bible and Patrick O'Brian, that's a pretty wide range. So anything in between I like to read.
Wonderful. Our next question is from Ayusha Shrestha from Salt Lake City, Utah, class of 23. Could you please stand? All right. And Ayusha has asked, how do you think the U.S. government can encourage more female representation in our government?
We have had a tremendous improvement in the female government since I first got involved in it. We've had an increase in the number of senators and congresswomen, and we also, as you know, have a number of very highly qualified women running for President of the United States. And I think that we have a good chance this next year of electing a woman president. I'm not going. I haven't yet made up my mind about endorsing anybody, but I'm thinking seriously about it. And I would say that we need to start at a lower level of government, in county politics and city politics. And now we have a tremendous number of women who are mayors of cities in the United States. When you see women come on to talk about a tragedy or an exciting achievement in a city around the nation, it's quite likely to be a woman. So I would say that the more women we have, the better off our country will be, the more peaceful we will be, and the more successful the United States will be in every way. So women, run for office, get elected. If you don't get elected the first time, run again. That's what I had to do.
All right. Our next question is from Sun Min from Suwanee, Georgia, class of 23. Sun Min, could you please stand? All right. And the question is, how should we fix the increasing polarization between parties in our country?
You know, this is a new development in American politics. When I was president, I had just as much support among Republicans as I did Democrats. There was no blue states and no red states. All the states were kind of mixed. And in Washington, there was a good bit of harmony and a real genuine friendship between Republicans and Democrats in the House and Senate, and also between the president, who happened to be me, and the members of Congress. But the reason that's come apart is because of maybe two basic reasons. One is that the gerrymandering in individual states that is done by the state legislature and their governor has resulted in districts that are highly focused on getting a particular party elected to the Congress. And of course, that carries over into political politics. And then there's another major change, and that is a massive infusion of money with the stupid decision of the Supreme Court on Citizens United. That has meant that America has changed from a democracy to an oligarchy. So wealth determines basically who is elected and who is not elected. The other thing that has polarized our country is the fact that the individual members of the Congress, when they get there, they pretty well have to raise a lot of money. And that money comes from the wealthiest people, and then the member of a Congress, the House or Senate, or the president sometimes, is very susceptible to influence from the people that finance his campaign or her campaign. So I think those two things are the most important. One is the Citizens United ruling that let money pour into the political system, and the other one is the gerrymandering of congressional districts. When I ran for President of the United States against Gerald Ford, a very fine Republican, you know how much money he and I raised for the general election? Zero. We just used a $1 per person checkoff, and when I ran 4 years later against Ronald Reagan, again, we raised zero funds. Now you have to raise hundreds of millions of dollars to hope to get the nomination for the Democratic or Republican Party, and you have to raise hundreds of millions of dollars to run the general election. That has all changed dramatically, and that is the main reason I think that we have a polarized government, is because of the gerrymandering of districts and the infusion of money.
Our next question is from Anjali Huyn from Iowa City, class of 23. Anjali, could you please stand? And Anjali has asked, what advice would you give to current Democratic presidential candidates?
I think the basic change that needs to be made in our government is for us to become a superpower, I'd say in 4 different categories of life. Not just military, I'll discount that, but I think we ought to be the #1 nation on earth in promoting peace, first of all. In a minute, I'll tell you why. We ought to be the #1 nation in the world in human rights. We ought to be the #1 nation in the world in environmental quality, dealing with climate change. And we ought to be the #1 nation in the world in welcoming everybody as equals to the United States. Let me give you a brief statistic. The United States has been a nation for 243 years, since 1776. The United States has been at peace 16 years. We've been at war 227 years. And since 1979, when I normalized relations with China, the United States has been at war in a number of countries. The largest ones are Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria and now Yemen. We've spent approximately $4 trillion on those wars that could have gone for the benefit of Americans. I normalized diplomatic relations with China in 1979, and since that year, China has not been at war with anybody. They have taken that equivalent amount of money, $4 trillion. They built 1,700 new universities in China. They built 18,000 miles of high-speed railroad. They go more than 200 miles an hour. Rose and I have ridden on some of them. Their bridges and their roads are right up to high standards. And they have almost completely eliminated extreme poverty in China. I'm not comparing America unfavorably with China. I'm just telling you what $4 trillion would have done. That's $4,000 billion. And we've wasted it on unnecessary wars. I would say almost all the wars in which our country has been involved, except the First and Second World War, were basically unnecessary. I'd say the Korean War and the Vietnam War and all those wars that I just mentioned, in Iraq and in Afghanistan, in Syria, and in Yemen. As you know, just recently the Congress condemned the Trump administration for having gone to war with partner of Saudi Arabia in Yemen, and voted overwhelmingly, an overwhelming majority, to withdraw from Yemen. But they couldn't get a veto override. So our country is inclined to go to war primarily because the American people, including you, are inclined to go to war. If it's a choice, say, of the United States going into a foreign country and imposing our way of life on them and getting them to adopt our form of government or something close to it, then Americans generally say, well, that's worthwhile. And you know the impact of an industrial complex, which is very much in tune with war. So, and also I think presidents are naturally inclined to want to become the commander-in-chief of the military forces instead of just a common, ordinary, harassed, dealer with domestic affairs. So America is a warlike country, and I would hope that in the future, all of you and the Carter Center as well would promote peace, not war. Thank you very much.
President Carter, our next question is from Eleanor. She is 6 years old, and she's from Atlanta. Eleanor, could you stand up? All right, here's Eleanor's question. She says, I know you go to Africa a lot. What is your favorite African animal?
I really think an elephant is my favorite. I've seen a lot of elephants, and what is your favorite, Eleanor? By the way, you have the same first name as my wife. My wife's first name is Eleanor. And you're very beautiful. And do you have a favorite animal? What? A cheetah. I've seen several cheetahs, not very many, but I've seen a lot more elephants, so that's why I like elephants. I don't like elephants when they're transferred to be the symbol of American policies, though. Party. But I don't guess you could consider donkeys an African elephant, an African animal. Huh? Okay, I'm ready for another one.
Great. So this question was posed by Carolina Gustafson from West Hartford, Connecticut, who is getting her PhD in nursing, and was also posed by Clara Pascal from Atlanta, who is a first year. So if you both could stand, that would be awesome. Great. They have both asked, what is the best and worst advice you've ever received?
By the way, my mother was a registered nurse, but she didn't answer difficult questions. She didn't ask difficult questions like that. I think the best advice I've ever received, generically speaking, was from my high school superintendent at Plains High School, where my wife and I both attended. Miss Julia Coleman used to tell us, we must accommodate changing times, but cling to principles that never change. So I think that one of the major responsibilities I've felt all my life because of that advice is to choose certain principles that I want to have as part of my religious belief and my personal belief. One of my earliest ones was do not lie, because my father insisted on us telling the truth. If we admitted that we had done something wrong, he wouldn't spank us. But if we lied about it and got caught, we were in for some serious trouble. And when I got to the U.S. Naval Academy as a midshipman, if you told the slightest little fib, you were instantly expelled. That was the end of your career in the Navy. So both those reasons have always convinced me to have that as one of my basic principles. Of course, taking care of others and being loyal to your wife and other things are also good principles to observe. So accommodate changing times, and we've had a lot of changing times in this life of ours, but choose a few key principles that never do change and let them be the foundation of your life. And the worst advice I think the worst advice I've ever had from my wife and many others when I was president was to bomb Iran when they captured our hostages. But I could very easily have killed, 10,000 or more Iranians. But I have always felt that if I had, they would almost certainly have killed the 50-something American hostages. So I tried to stay at peace with Iran. And by the way, some of those countries, that 16 that I mentioned where we stayed at peace, were when I was in charge of the United States. Thank you for your good questions.
Our next question is from Derek Villanueva from Lilburn, Georgia, class of 23. Derek, could you stand up? Derek has asked, how do you motivate yourself to help not only your local communities, but global as well?
Well, I generally try to do what my wife tells me to do. So I have a self-motivator in my house, and I try to do what she says most of the time. Not always. But so when we're in Plains, Georgia, we try to do what we can to make Plains a better place in which to live. we have 700 people in Plains. We have 11 churches, so we're a deeply religious community. And one of the important keys in my life is Maranatha Baptist Church, where I teach Sunday school twice a month. And we have an African-American pastor now who's doing an extra good job. When I was president of the United States, I tried to do what I thought was best for other people as well. And one of those was to promote human rights, and the other one was to keep the peace. So I was able to do the best I could with human rights, and we were able to keep the peace. So I think servant leadership is something that everybody can aspire to do. So if you are in Emory and going to graduate and become a privileged person in America, I think if you would just adopt a position of leadership in your community or in your family or in a larger scale, and try to do what's best for other people.
All right. Our next question is from Yasmin Dang from Palm Harbor, Florida. Your class of 23. Could you please stand? She's asked, what do you see in America's future?
Well, I've already spelled out an answer to that question. I think the Carter Center is adopting a new policy now that we've accomplished a lot of our other original goals. And one of the things that I mentioned a while ago is I'd like to see America be the champion of peace and human rights and environmental equality and treating everybody the same. So that would be my goals for America. And that was the same answer I gave when I was asked to encourage, what would I do to encourage the candidates running for the Democratic position of president. But no matter who the president is, Democratic or Republican, I think we ought to become the champion of peace. I would like for every person in the world, in whatever country you live, if you have the threat of a civil war or war with a neighbor, why don't you be able to say someday, why don't we go to Washington? Because Americans know how to keep the peace. Or why don't you go to Washington? Because America knows how to promote human rights. Or why don't you go to Washington? Because America is a champion of environmental equality and dealing with global warming. Or why don't you go to Washington? Because they treat everybody the same. You know, immigrants and longtime residents like me. And so that's what I would hope for the future of the United States of America. I hope someday we'll see it come. Thank you very much.
All right, President Carter, this will be our last question. It is from @Payreese on Instagram. Could you please stand? I hope I got that right. Okay. And the question is, as a peanut farmer, what are your thoughts on almond butter?
I never have tasted it, and I don't intend to. We only have peanut butter in our house. Thank you very much.